Welcome back to Taiwan Outlook. Our guest today is Professor Raymond Wu of Fudan University.
Yes.
Raymond, we've been talking about election in Taiwan last week. And actually, last weekend we also voted on the two referendum bills. And these two bills did not get passed. Why is that?
Well, first, we had the two bills, one on the reclaiming the KMT party assets,
right.
the other one on anti-corruption. Okay, but the fact of the matter remains is I personally see at least two factors that attributed to the fact that these two referenda didn't pass. First and foremost, I think it's because the one of the referendums sponsored, the KMT party, some like 10 days before the election, have gone on public, on record, to urge the blue supporters to boycott the referendum. Okay, I think this is somewhat of a surprise, a mild surprise to a lot of people here. But the fact of the matter remains is it certainly had a very direct bearing on the voter turnout.
That's right.
You had less than 30% of the people voting, which reflected pretty much, what the KMT strategy was to make sure that the threshold for 50% turnout is not met.
That's right.
So the referendum becomes irrelevant. It's not validated.
That's right.
So that's one factor. I think this factor has really had a direct bearing on the eventual outcome. And the second factor, maybe, because this issue, especially on reclaiming the party assets of the KMT, is an issue that's still very divisive in the society.
That's right.
There isn't a consensus, on the issue. I do agree with some people that feel very strongly, because the KMT party state in the past decades, a lot of the party assets that were originally illegally seized should be returned to the public, to the government. I think the KMT knows that too. But the fact of the matter remains is how the assets can be inventoried, and also how can they be returned in the original form or value, or the asset can be used again by the public or by the government. So all these things, we may not have yet a consensus on these matters in the society, and people felt like by taking part, by participating in the referendum vote, it would have been an act of heightened social tension, heightened social incohesion in Taiwan. So people felt like this might be something, maybe the right thing, but maybe the wrong time. And so that's why the referendum, both of them, didn't get passed.
But Taiwan is a young democracy, and
course.
referendum is a new practice of democracy in Taiwan, and there have been discussions about whether we can have a better democracy. For instance, some people say that the threshold for passing the referendum is too high. You need 50% of the eligible voters to cast their votes first, and then out of this 50, you have another 50% of majority votes,
of course,
to pass the referendum. Do you think that it's a fair statement?
Well, that's always been a topic of discussion in Taiwan, as well as with foreign visitors that come to Taiwan and examine the political system here. Of course, in normal, stable democracies, if the legislatures are functional, functioning well, and normally you would not want to go through outside the system avenues like referendum, direct democracy by the masses, to pass legislation or pass bills. But the fact of the matter remains is our LY in the last maybe decade has not been very, very efficient. He's not known for his efficiency, but better for the inside LY brawls you see often on international television and things. So that's why the referendum law was passed 4 or 5 years ago, and then people have been looking forward to it, because this is a way for the electorate, for the voters themselves, to exercise their rights, to voice their opinions, make their votes count on very important public policy issues. And because the fact that we have not had a legislature that's efficient, that's being able to do its job, that's why there's so much focus and so much looking forward to having this referendum mechanism available. However, I agree with you. the 5%, the 50% threshold, may be a little too high on some of the issues. But the fact of the matter remains is this is something that needs to be re-examined by the new LY, the one that's dominated by one party. But I do hope that there are members in the KMT caucuses, can see this is an issue, this is a problem, needs to be examined. Maybe on some of the issues that are come up in the future for referenda, that we can have a different threshold for the referendum outcome to be effective.
Another controversial issue that arose before the election is about the one-step, two-step voting procedures for the referendum. One argument is that you need to retain people's secrecy when they cast votes. But when you have two-step voting procedure, in other words, you decide to pick up your votes or not, you reveal your true voting preference. So probably that people suggest that we should revise the system and try to give the people some secrecy in casting their referendum ballots. What's your take on that?
Well, I think for the last 2 months or so, Taiwan has been embroiled in itself over this debate about whether it should be one-step or two-step vote distribution for the ballots on the LY election and also the ballots on the referendum votes.
That's right.
On surface, I think a lot of people, general public, may think it's a little bit of childish or doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have this ongoing debate about the format of distribution. But the fact of the matter remains, like what Zhi you just said, we should pay more attention and or have some better safeguards over the right to secret balloting in Taiwan. But also the fact of the matter remains is, it should not be somewhat of a factor that would generate reluctance.
That's right.
That would generate a fear of divisiveness in the society. So that's why I do hope, as a young democracy is now maturing and becoming more stable, all these issues can be debated in the future in a very rational and nonpartisan manner. We should debate these issues. Albeit it's a little bit controversial, but debate these issues based on merits. And based on the public's best interest, the people's general welfare as the most important consideration.
The disputes this time will resolve eventually days before the election date. But again, in March, we are going to have another referendum. Do you think that the same controversy will come up again?
Oh, I certainly hope not. But the fact of the matter remains is I think the positions of the two major parties will be very, very important. First, will KMT try to boycott the two referendum coming up? I don't know. I mean, maybe you have friends in the KMT can shed some light on this. But the fact of the matter remains is the KMT also sponsored one of the two referendum for the March 22nd vote. And the United Nations issue, of course, is very, very close and very, very dear to a lot of people in Taiwan. Why should Taiwan, as the 13th largest trading nation in the world, be excluded from the United Nations and from the associated international organizations? So that's why our international space is a paramount importance to a lot of people in Taiwan. And no doubt, China is watching this. Beijing is paying close attention as to how these two referenda will actually turn out in the end. So KMT's position, of course, is a factor. If they go on another boycott campaign, urging the voters not to pick up the ballots again, of course, we may have another issue of a low voter turnout, and then the referendum becomes invalid. But second, the DPP position will also be of critical importance, because I know the president is very much behind this referendum to join the UN under the name of Taiwan.
That's right.
But now I think after the LY election, there's some changes, within the DPP in terms of personnel and possibly campaign strategy and tactics. Whether Mr. Frank Shea, the DPP nominee for the presidency, will follow the same strong movement and commitment as the president has exhibited in the past. I don't know, and there are indications that Mr. Frank Shea may not push the referendum as hard as the president has. That issue remains to be seen. But I think the position of the two major parties will be very important. And also third is the position of Washington, Taiwan's most important ally. Washington, from Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice on down, a number of important, senior officials in U.S. government have spoken, publicly about the U.S. government position on the referendum, especially the referendum to join the UN under the name of Taiwan. Of course, the U.S. position is against it, opposes such a referendum. But the fact of the matter remains is I don't think the United States government opposes referenda per se, okay, but just the issue, and they felt the issue on its own merits does not warrant at this time, at the time when cross-strait relations is somewhat unstable, to worsen the risk to get involved in the process.
But looking at what happened last weekend, do you think that that Beijing and Washington are now more relieved about the prospect for the UN referendum?
I don't think so. I think because the March 22nd referendum are completely different issues, and the issues have very different implications internationally as well as domestically. Okay, and the UN referendum coming out on the 22nd of March will have a far-reaching impact for Taiwan's international relations, as well as the relations across the Taiwan Straits. Even United States has regarded the passage of the UN referendum as a first step, important step towards Taiwan independence. So this is something of a concern, I think, in Taiwan. But whether that's we have enough time in the next 68 or 67 days to resolve these differences with Washington, I think that remains to be seen. But the fact of the matter remains is these two referendums that are coming up in March are very, very different from the ones that we just had.
That's right. As you mentioned earlier, that the so-called reclaiming KMT parties is the referendum. That particular referendum is quite partisan. It's very divisive in Taiwan. But on the issue of UN membership, I think it's quite cross-partisan lines, and the support is quite high in Taiwan. So that may be supported by the people.
So that's why I think even if the referendum in the end doesn't pass, but I think the fact of the matter remains is Taiwan needs to be internationally visible. The people of Taiwan entitled to the right to speak their mind on important international issues, especially on issues pertaining to Taiwan's own welfare. Taiwan is now shut out of the international forums where issues relating to Taiwan's own benefits are being discussed and debated. This is unfair. And Taiwan is now a democracy. United States, among others, are very much pushing for worldwide democratic movement. How can we deny the 23 million people in Taiwan their right to have a direct vote, a direct saying in their own affairs? I think that is something of a somewhat contradiction, and also it could be hypocritical if it's something that's completely denied as the right to the people of Taiwan.
So the U.S. just cannot wish the Taiwan's concerns and problems go away.
No.
Even without a referendum, I think the problem for Taiwan's international space is still there.
Also the message to Beijing is also very clear.
That's right.
You need to address Taiwan's international space. You also need to address Taiwan's political status. What is Taiwan today? If it's not the Republic of China, it's not Taiwan, and what is it? I mean, if you're going to treat Taiwan as an equal partner, as top leaders in the PRC have often repeated publicly that they will do so. But how are you going to treat Taiwan if not as an independent, sovereign political entity? What is it then? It's certainly not the province of the PRC. So that part is clear. And if you're going to enter into any type of negotiation with Taiwan and treat Taiwan as an equal counterpart, how are you going to treat? How are you going to regard Taiwan's status politically and internationally? I think that's the issue. Beijing needs to take a serious look and give a very serious response.
Do you think Beijing realized the problem? Because just this week, they just took away another Taiwan's diplomatic allies, Malawi. So apparently they are more aggressive now in terms of launching this kind of diplomatic offensives.
So it also shows that the different governmental organs in the PRC government don't really coordinate with each other, because what the Taiwan Affairs Office says publicly as goodwill gestures towards Taiwan will be completely overthrown and discounted by the actions of PRC's foreign ministry. I agree with you, Zhi Zhen, that the international pressure coming out of Beijing on Taiwan's international space will only intensify. It's not going to decrease in the future. Right. With China now has risen, if it's not still rising, its power, its resources, its influences have been expanding exponentially in the last few years, and it's going to use that against Taiwan's international space. It's going to put a further squeeze on Taiwan, and also I think the number of missiles that are targeted against Taiwan will only be on the rise in the future. And if that continues, however, I have a terrible message to Beijing, is that even if you do have, after March 22nd, a KMT president as well as a KMT-dominated legislature in Taiwan, if all these other actions that are deemed by the general public in Taiwan as hostile, as confrontational, I don't think anything that coming out of Beijing as goodwill gestures, whether in rhetoric or in deeds, towards Taiwan, will be self-defeating. Will be a self-defeating prophecy, and that's not going to be helpful to the relations across Taiwan Straits, and certainly risk further confrontation and possibly outright conflict in the future.
In 10 weeks' time, there will be another election coming.
Of course.
And apparently people have been talking about whether there will be pendulum effects or the so-called coattail effects of the AY election on the presidential election. So when we come back, Professor Raymond Wu will be telling us his hunch about which effect is going to take place. Stay with us, we'll be right back.